This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Sai. Let's take a look at Parak. Hey, we learned at the end of Parak Daled, in Pasuk Chav Daled, that because of the accusers, the scheme of the accusers, and they had a whole shtick with translating the Aramaic into a Persian that could be misinterpreted, that the Jews were not just building the Beis HaMikdash like Koresh had granted permission, but they were also building Yerushalayim as a rebellious city. The last pasuk in Parak Daled ended off that the building of the Beis HaMikdash was put to a halt, and it ceased until the second year of Daryavesh, okay, the Persian, the last Daryavesh, okay, the son of Achashverosh and Esther. Okay.
Is it a known fact that he was their son?
Is it a known fact?
I mean, is that everybody holds like that? I mean, it's one thing I was always told.
Yeah, that's pretty much accepted. Now the question is, did Esther really live with him? Was it a shade? Was it a... Okay, but that's a separate discussion. Fine. Parakeh. The Hisnabi Chagai Neviah. Chagai the Navi prophesied, and this could be found in Sefer Chagai as well, in Parak Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. Zechariah var Idai, and Zechariah the son of Idai. Now, was Zechariah actually the son of Idai? No. Zechariah was the grandson of Idai. But sometimes in Chumash we refer to the grandfather as the father. Right? Right. Neviah. They prophesied al Yehudaye to the Jews, Dibihud, that were living in Yehuda over Yerushalayim and Yerushalayim. B'shum Elaka Yisrael Alehan, in the name of God regarding them. Now, Rashi learns that the word V'hisnabi means now. What's now? We just ended off Parak Daled that it's the second year of Daryavesh II. So now in the second year the Nevi'im prophesied. Which Nevi'im? Chagai and Zechariah. Rashi learns that when it says Al Yehudaye, it doesn't mean regarding the Jews, but rather to the Jews who are living in Yehuda and Yerushalayim in the name of God, that they should go build the bayis below rishus without permission. Wow, that was bold. That was gutsy. But now they were going to take the initiative to build a Beis HaMikdash without permission, acting on the old permission that Koresh had given them. Now Koresh is way back. Koresh again is Nebuchadnezzar, Evamaradach, Belshazzar, Koresh, and then followed by Nebuchadnezzar, Evamaradach, Belshazzar, Daryavesh the first, then Koresh, Achashverosh, Daryavesh. So that means for many, many years, throughout the reign of Achashverosh, they never had permission, and now they're going to act without any royal rishus. So Pasuk Beis, Beidayin.
In the age of Daryavesh II?
In the second year of Daryavesh II.
So it took a few years till he gave the permission?
No, he didn't give permission.
They're
doing this without rishus.
No, but didn't Daryavesh
No, Koresh gave permission, right? The Navi, how does Ezra start?
I remember that.
Good. Right? Ezra starts, Shnasachas the Koresh,
Yes, I understand,
right?
but then they stopped.
They stop. So now they're acting without rishus.
So Daryavesh II never gave permission?
No, not yet. No.
Eventually.
We'll see. I can't disclose now what's going to happen later on. But I'm saying right now,
Who was Esther's son?
Daryavesh,
The second?
the second.
So this is after the Purim story.
This is after the Purim story.
Way after the Purim.
Way after. The Purim story is like a side thought in Sefer Ezra. We don't even refer to it. There's no reference at all made to what happened in Shushan. This is Sefer Ezra is focused on the Binyan Habayis. So Koresh gave permission at first. We sort of skipped the whole reign of Achashverosh. Very little is mentioned about Achashverosh, other than in the beginning of Parak Daled, it talks about the accusations that were written during his reign also.
Do any of them person, to your knowledge, ask why was it that after Mordechai became a very powerful man in the reign of Achashverosh, he didn't give permission to have the Beis HaMikdash constructed there?
Yeah. Look in Sefer in Esther, Megillas Esther. How many times did Achashverosh say, "Ad chatzi hamalchus b'seyas," up to half the kingdom, which the Gemara says means I'll do anything but build the Beis HaMikdash. That was one thing that
They
Achashverosh
interpret
was
that to mean not the number of provinces,
right.
just that you can't build a base.
That which stands in the middle of the kingdom. In other words, the one thing Achashverosh had no flexibility about was the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Okay.
But he also made a big party. The big party was celebrating his 70-year
Correct.
Cheshbon,
Right.
So his 70-year Cheshbon, were the Jews back already? Some of the Jews were already back from Babel back into Israel, to Yerushalayim?
During the reign of Achashverosh, in the 3rd year of his reign, had some Jews returned? Certainly. Jews returned even before, right?
Koresh gave permission.
Right, many Jews returned time of Koresh. Okay, so I believe from the beginning of Koresh until they actually built the Beis HaMikdash, if I'm not mistaken, it was 18 years. Right? Okay. So Abosai, now we're talking about Nevuah over here. The Nevuah of Chagai and Zechariah, just thrown as a side point in connection to this week's Parsha. We talk about Nevuah, and this week we talk about the Urim and Tumim. Right? The crazy place of the Urim and Tumim. In what way was Urim and Tumim like Nevuah? Was it better than Nevuah? Was it less than Nevuah? So actually Nevuah was a higher form of communication than the Urim and Tumim. However, the Urim and Tumim had 2 advantages over Nevuah. What were the 2 advantages? Number 1, the Urim and Tumim, once Hashem communicated through the Urim and Tumim, it cannot be rescinded. Nevuah could always be rescinded. If Hashem tells a Navi something bad's going to happen, it could always change. If Hashem tells a Navi something good's going to happen, but the Navi doesn't repeat it over, it could also change. So Nevuah is not automatic. It's not set in stone. But what is set in stone is the Urim and Tumim. Whatever is written on the stone is set in the stone. Yeah? And the other, so that's why the Zalman Sorotzkin says, it says about the Urim and Tumim, it's tamim. Tamim means complete. In other words, it's definitely going to happen. One
Did
other.
they have the Urim and Tumim second Beis HaMikdash?
No. Now the question is, what does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, they didn't have the right. The 5 things they didn't have in the Bayis Sheni were. Remember the acronym? Remember my acronym?
Funny sounding name.
Asher with 3 aleph, right? Remember that? Aron, Eish, Urim V'Tumim, Shechina, Ruach HaKodesh. It works every time. Asher with 3 alephs, right? Anyway, so they didn't have the Urim V'Tumim. But also the Urim V'Tumim was at their availability at will. Whenever they wanted it, they could summon the Urim V'Tumim. Nevuah, only Moshe Rabbeinu had Nevuah at will. Other Nevi'im...
Somebody, only the...
Yeah, but whenever Klal Yisrael needed, they could get info from the Urim V'Tumim. They didn't have to be in a certain frame of mind or a certain mode. It was tamid. That's why in this week's Parsha it says L'fnei Hashem tamid. But Nevuah was not tamid. It was only when Hashem decided and the Navi met the prerequisites. Okay. So Nevuah was a higher form of communication. Nevertheless, the Urim V'Tumim had certain advantages. Okay. Back to the ranch. Pasuk Beis Beidayin. At that time, Kamu, Zerubbabel bar Shealtiel. Zerubbabel got up. Now, who's Zerubbabel? Yeah, he was the leader of Yehuda. We mentioned that he's Nehemiah. V'Yeshua bar, and he was a descendant of who? The Rasha Yechanya. Yeah, and Yechanya, Yechanya should have died in the prison. Remember this? And Nebuchadnezzar, the Sanhedrin, pleaded that Nebuchadnezzar should have 1 night with his wife. And what happened? She said, Shoshana Aduma Ra'isi. She said she was Persanida. And they took him out of the pit. They took her out of the pit. She was Toivel. And she conceived. And who came from that? Zerubbabel. Fine. V'Yeshua bar Yotzadok. Yeshua bar Yotzadok Kohen Gadol. V'Shariv. And they began Lemivnei Beis Alakadi B'Yerushalayim. They began to build the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Ve'imahayna, with them Niviyaya, the prophets Di Alaka of God, and Mesadin Lahayin. They helped them also. So they began to build the Beis HaMikdash of Hashem. That was in Yerushalayim, and they also had prophets with them that Hashem was assisting.
Did you just say Zerubbabel was Nehemiah?
I think I did say that. Yeah.
So when we do the Chanukah...
Kates Bavel, Zerubbabel?
No, but when we do the Chanukah Haftorah, right?
And he was simply.
That Zerubbabel is that they're talking about is Nehemiah?
Possibly. Well, let's say, where do we have this before? In Paragimel Pasuk Ches. Who's Zerubbabel? I believe we did mention. Did we have any of the Farshim say explicitly? Let's see.
Say it was Nehemiah?
Yeah, the Gemara says Zerubbabel was. The Gemara says Zerubbabel was Nehemiah. Where is this Gemara? Sanhedrin on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis says Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel was Nehemiah. Okay?
Rabbi, is there any significance when it says the Nevi'aya?
Yeah.
That this Nevi'aya ends with a hey? I don't know if that's feminine. And the Nevi'aya up on Bab in Pasuk Aleph is with an Aleph. Did we have any female Nevi'ot? No, but I know at this time.
Where? What? One? Where?
The Nevi'aya in Pasuk Beis. Nun Beis Yud Aleph Yud Hey.
Hey, yeah, and then
Nevi'aya in Pasuk Aleph, it ends with an Aleph. It's spelled the same way, it just ends in an Aleph.
actually it doesn't. It's actually spelled with a hey there also.
Really?
Yeah. It's a Greek sieve. It's a Greek sieve. We spell it with a hey, but
The Nevi'ah is a Krenic sieve. The first one. But
Correct.
the second one is not a Krenic sieve.
no, that one is not a Greek sieve. But it's ksiv with the hey. So in Pasuk Aleph, it is written with the hey. Why it's read without, I don't know. Okay, so Pasuk Gimel, Beis Zimna, at that time, Asa Alehoin, he came upon them, Tatnai, good old Tatnai. Who's Tatnai? Pachas Avar Nahara. He's the officer, the satrap of the Trans-River area. In other words, on the other side of the Euphrates, our side of the Euphrates. He was the appointee of Daryavesh to oversee the Trans-River area. Ushesar Boiznai, together with a guy by the name of Shesar Boiznai, Uchin Vasain, and their associates. V'chein Amrin Lahaim, and then they said to the Jews, Man Sam Lachaim, who gave you ta'im, permission, Baisa Dina Livne, to build this house, V'usharna Dina L'shachlala, and to lay the foundations of the wall. In other words, what are you doing?
You don't have a building.
You don't have the permit. Did you ever get official legal permission to do what you're doing? In other words, the simple meaning of this pasuk, and that's how Rashi learns. They were challenged. They were with the bad guys. They were on the bad side. They were on the dark side. They were trying to instigate and put a halt to this binyan that was being built without any rishus. However, as Kedarkoi B'Kodesh, we spoke on Friday about the godless of the Malbim. The Malbim has an ingenious understanding over here. In other words, It's interesting. He brings down over here from the Perkei Rebbe Lezer and the Yalkut Shimoni that the Shomronim, the Samaritans, are actually threatening to attack the Jews who are building the Beis Hamikdash with 180,000 men. That's a pretty large army. Now, until this period of time, the status of the Kusim, of the Shomronim, was very much in question. Are they Geirei Emes? Are they Geirei Arayos? But here, they're coming to attack the Jewish people with 100,000 people, trying to put an end to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So now, the Anshe Knesset Agdola get together, Ezra, Zerubbabel, Yoshua, and they're going to condemn them for eternal cherem. So what they do, Klal Yisrael gets together at the Har Habayis. They bring 300 Tinoikos Shel Beis Rabban, carrying 300 Sifrei Torah, 300 Kohanim, blowing 300 Shofaros. The Leviim are singing, and they invoke the Shem HaMefarash, and they eternally place the Kusim in cherem. They make them lose their Olam Haba, and their geyser that you cannot eat bread baked by a Kusi. And they banish them from the world to come, and they lose all share of Olam Haba. We're going to see that even Daryavish himself endorsed this cherem. So, Rabbi said, that's Rashi, that's Lefi, the simple pshat, that Tatnai and his cohorts are trying to instigate and put a halt to the Binyan HaMikdash.
So why did the Gemara have a whole shot of the Torah about the status of Kutim?
That's before this incident.
The Gemara before this incident?
Yeah. No, the Gemara. No, the Gemara is discussing their status before this incident, but after this incident, they're considered, they're oisvarfs. They're thrown out. They're michutz samachna.
Does that mean they're Geirei Arayos? What the Gemara called them?
They're not gerim at all. After this incident, we threw them out. And not only that, they were geyser that from this point on, no kusim could be accepted as gerim.
So all the discussions about if I buy something from a Kutim and all that was before this cherem was put into effect?
That's what, yeah.
Why is it, when we had the Maisa with Koresh, so they went to complain to the king that the Jews are going to be rebellious in their building.
Yeah.
But these characters, who were the satrap,
yeah,
they were lower level functionaries, right?
Right.
They decide on their own that they're going to stop the Jews, and they're not going to go to the king and tell them, look what the Jews are doing without your permission.
They are going to go to the king. But the first thing they do is they go direct and they say, this is illegal. So now if the Jews are not going to listen...
180,000 men? They're going to gather up that kind of an army without the king's permission?
The king is, hundreds of miles away. The king doesn't even know what's going on. It's not like, he's getting text messages on, what's happening in... So Rabbi say, the Malbim has a Goinistic upshot over here, that Tatnai and their others, in their capacity as the agents of the king, they're just doing their job. In other words, they were not trying to put a halt to the Binyan HaBayis, but they were just innocently asking,
bureaucrats,
do you have permission to build this? Now, if they don't, okay, we'll decide what to do. But the first step is, they were just asking innocently, what are you doing? Do you have permission to do this? Now, the Malbim learns that this was hashgacha pratis, that they asked them this question. Because once they asked them, so now basically their response would be, we allow you to continue doing this until we hear word from the king. But had they not given that temporary allowance, had the real accusers heard about it first, the accusers would have, jumped the gun and taken advantage and put a halt to it. But now that these satraps have given, what is it called, provincial credit until it's determined whether they have permission or not, so the Jews were able to continue building it. We'll see how this plays out in the upcoming psukim. Okay, pasuk Daled, Edayin. What does Edayin mean? Then, right? Kenema is also a big word. A very frequent word in Ezra. Kenema, the following, Amar Elohim, we said to them, Man inun shemaas govraya. Give us the names of the men, Di Dinav and Yanu Banayin, that are building this binyan. Pashup Pshat is that they're saying, will you have permission? Give us an official list. We want to know every man who's building the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, we're going to submit it to the king to see if he allows this. However, the Malbim Kedarkoi, Lefidarkoi, understands that this is not the request that the satraps are making of the Jews, but rather this is the Jews' response to the satraps. In other words, then we Jews, we said to them the names of the people involved, and in other words, the Jews are telling them the big names, all the Jewish officials that the king put into place or are involved in building the bayis. They said, who's building it? Zerubbabel, who is an officially licensed builder of the king, and Yehoshua the Kohen Gadol. In other words, this is the Jewish people's response to the accusations or the innocent questions of the satraps. Okay. Pasuk Hey. Ve'ein elot kahoim. Right? But that's not, we don't want to say Hashem's name. It was the eye of God, the providence of God. Havas was al-Save Yehudaye, was watching over the Jewish elders, V'lavatilu himai, and they did not interfere with the building of the bayis at taima l'Daryavish Yahach, until this matter could be brought before Daryavish. The Edayin, and then Yesivon nishtavana al dana. And then Daryavish would write a letter regarding it. In other words, take a look at Rashi. It was the eye of Hashem, who is the God of the Jews, watched over the Jewish elders to allow them to continue building, and they were not given the opportunity to interfere until...
They were not given the opportunity. They chose not to interfere.
No, in other words, Hashem sort of guarded over them and didn't allow anyone to interfere. In other words, and the Jewish elders were able to at least temporarily convince the accusers not to do anything until Daryavish would respond formally to the people in charge. Fine. Parshegen igarta, the text of the letter, the shalach tatnai, that Tatnai sent Pachas Avarnara, who is the satrap of the Trans River area, Ushasar Boiznai, as well as Shasar Boiznai Uchin Vase and his cohorts, Afar Sechoye, the dweller, the Afar Sachites, who were a people, a nation that lived Be'evar Hanar, Diva Avarnara, Al Daryavish Mak. In other words, this is the text of the letter they sent to Daryavish.
Well, how do these Afar Sechoye come in? Because when we talked before about who was involved in this questioning about the authority, it talks about Tarti, right? And it talks about
it doesn't mention
Bashar Boznan, but it doesn't talk about
these guys. Well, if I'm not mistaken, in Parak
means their companion.
Right, but what about, but the next after that?
It didn't mention them earlier.
If I'm not mistaken, in the beginning of Parak Daled, when it talked about a whole bunch of nations that joined in the accusation, the Afar Sas Chaye were right in there. They were actually the first people mentioned. So why here we're only mentioning them and we didn't mention them originally? I don't know, but they were also in on it. Okay.
What are they talking about when they use the city outside of the environment?
The meaning Israel.
What are they talking about? The Jordan River?
No. The Euphrates River. In other words, the main empire was on the east side of the Euphrates, but this is something that's happening on the west side. The west side of the Euphrates is Eretz Yisrael. Okay, is that?
I really runs east, west, north, south. No? So it's on the east. It's on the east side of the river. Okay. I thought it was like north over there.
No, but
where's the seat of power now in Persia somewhere?
Yeah, the seat of power is in Persia. So that's on the east side of the Euphrates. That's the east side of the Euphrates. The west side of the Euphrates is Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Pisgama shalachu Alahi, the letter they sent to him. V'chidna ksiv v'gaveh, and the following was written in it. L'Daryavish Malka, to Darius the king, Shlama Chayla, all peace. In other words, that was their greeting.
Be with you.
Yeah. Then Shalom Aleichem. Yediya lehevel Malka, to be notified before the king. Diazalna, we went Lihud to Yehuda, Medinta, the region of Yehuda, Levesa Lakaraba, to the house of the great God. V'hu mispenei, it's being built, Even Galal, out of marble. Now, what exactly is Even Galal? The Mepharshim say Even Galal is the rolling stone. The rolling stone. Yeah? What is
existed in those days?
What is a rolling stone? I mean,
That's how they built it. They took stones and they rolled them over the wood in order to get the stones to build the walls.
So actually, according to the Malbim, who learns that Tatanai was not trying to challenge the Binyan Habayis, but rather innocently asking the king, so he actually was including information that would be beneficial to the Jews. In other words, they were not using those large hewn stones that Shlomo HaMelech used to build the first bayis. Instead, they're using rolling stones that are smaller, that could just be rolled to build for the Beis HaMikdash. V'ah, and with wood, mitzam, they're fortifying bechuslaya, the walls, which would also be information now that advantageous to the Jews. In other words, they're not building such a strong edifice, they're fortifying with wood, we could always burn it down. Va'aviditadach, and this work, as parna misavda, is happening very quickly, umatzlach biyadhoim, and they're being successful at it. In other words, the message was being sent that none of the other nations are interfering, which would indicate that they're acting in good faith. And they're not, and the Jews don't pose a threat.
About rebelling like they did with the first
right.
letter.
In other, the way the Malbim learns that Tatnai was asking in good faith.
But the Apras who signed on to this letter, they were bad guys in the first time around, right?
Yeah, so look,
and they allowing this letter, which was not very hostile, to go through.
So apparently, they had a change of heart over here, like the pasuk says in pasuk Hey, ve'ein elokahim. This was with the divine providence. Okay, pasuk Tes. Edayin, then, she'elno l'savaya ilech, we asked these elders, Kenema, Amar Nolhem, we said the following to them. This is all in the letter that they're sending to Daryavesh. Man sam l'chaim te'em. Who gave you permission that Baisa dina l'mivniya, to build this house? Usharna dina l'shachlala, to lay the foundations of the wall. Who taught, right? They're saying, we asked them, who gave you permission? Even their names we asked. To let us know. That we could record the name of their leaders. And the following. They responded to us to say, Anachna, we are Himai. We are the servants of the God of heaven, Va'ara, and the God of the earth. Uvanayin baisa dihava b'nei. And we're building a house, dihava b'nei, that was already built, mikadmas dina, before us, shnin sagion, many, many years. We're not building something new. We're rebuilding something that had been built in the ancient times, in a long time ago. Umelech lisarav, and a great king for Klal Yisrael, Benahi, had already built it, V'shachlele, and founded it.
Is that the Bayis Rishon?
Yeah.
And it refers to Shlomo?
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. That, right, it refers to the great king Shlomo. Lahain, therefore, Mindi Hargizu Avahasana Lelakashemaya. Lahain. Lahain, what does Lahain mean? Now. Mindi, because Hargizu Avasana, our fathers angered, Lela Kashemaya, the God of heaven. Yahav Hima, he gave us, Biyad Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. He delivered us into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel, Kazda, the Chaldean. Ubaisa Dina, Sasrain, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed this house. V'yama, and the people, Hagli LeBavel. He exiled to Bavel. Biram, however, Bishnas Chada LeKoresh Malka, in the first year of Koresh the king, Di Bavel, Koresh Malka, Koresh the king, some Ta'im, gave a decree, Beisa L'Kadina L'Mivne, for us to build this house. And not only that, V'yaf Manaya. In other words, the Jews were trying to prove their innocence and how they too would pose no threat, because even Koresh, V'af Manaya, even the vessels, Diveis Alakah, that were in the house of God, in the Beis Hamikdash. Di dava v'chaspa of gold and silver. Di Nebuchadnezzar handpake. Then Nebuchadnezzar removed min heichla di Yerushalayim from the temple in Yerushalayim. V'hevel imay, Nebuchadnezzar brought it laheichla di Bavel to the temple, his pagan temple in Bavel. Handpake imay Koresh Malka. Koresh the king removed min heichla di Bavel from the temple in Bavel. V'hivu, and he gave it l'sheish batzar shemei, to a guy by the name of Sheish Batzar. Difecha shemei, difecha somebody that was placed, that was appointed a officer. Now, who is Sheish Batzar? We had this before in the beginning of the Sefer. Who's Sheish Batzar? What do you call me?
Rabbi. We're talking about the prophet.
Who is Sheish Batzar?
It looks like it's an anagram of Belshazzar.
Who is Sheish Batzar?
Belshazzar. With an extra shin.
So we had in Ezra, Parak Aleph, Pasuk Ches, that Koresh took out the vessels through Misradas HaGizbar, and he gave it by count to Sheish Batzar. And Rashi says, Daniel, why is he called Sheish Batzar? Because he stood up to 6 tragedies. Sheish Batzar. Okay? And Rabbi said we will examine this further, Mitzvah Hashem, next week.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.